Today we're going to be going through the rigging process. We've already taken the character and bound his joints to his skin, and so the next step we're going to go through is the rigging process. In order for us to animate this character's arms and legs, we're going to use what's called inverse kinematics. So you can see at this time, our character has already had his skin attached to his joints. So when we make some slight adjustments, it moves. I'm going to set our character back to our assumed preferred angle. When we initially bound the skin to his joints, we went through and set preferred angle, and now I can see that my leg is not perfectly lined, so I'm going to go to an assumed preferred angle. So in order for us to create inverse kinematics on this character, and the idea is that when we create a single chain, it will allow our character to rotate at his shoulder, but we're going to pick up his wrist for his elbow to bend in the backwards fashion. Okay, so to do so, let's get started. I'm going to come up to the top here under skeleton and click on the options box next to the IK handle tool. Inside the IK handle tool over here on the left hand side, you'll see there's two different choices. One is a single chain solver and the other one's a rotation plane solver. And for the arms, again, we're going to use a single chain solver. Always start closest to the core. You skip a joint typically, and then you end it at the furthest away, which is where the handle is going to be, almost like a puppet of sorts. So I'm not going to click on the clavicle. I want to make sure I click on his shoulder. It'll highlight the joints. That's the only visual you will get out of clicking on the shoulder. And then click a second time, the second click I should say, happens at the wrist. Now to test this out, I'm going to actually click on this new IK handler. Let me turn on my X-ray so that way you can see the IK handler inside of there. It's this connector between the shoulder and the wrist, and now as I move it, his arm is going to bend backwards. This gives me nice flexibility with the arm. The idea of the single chain is that I have full flexibility to basically bend the arm up, down. I can probably move it all the way around, so that way I can do any kind of swim kind of motions and actions. There's really no limit in terms of how far I can bend or move the arm. Your biggest limitation is you as an animator don't want to put it through his heads or through his body. So that's going to be your biggest control issue, is you controlling it as an animator. But the single chain solver allows us to move the arm in any direction. I always relate it to something very similar to the butterfly stroke in swimming. Okay, the second kind of IK that we're going to attach to our character is called the rotation plane. The last used tool on the left hand side in the toolbar is the IK handler. We're going to change this drop down list from a single chain to a rotation plane, and once again I'm going to click at the highest point first. For us it's going to be the hip area. It'll highlight the joints. That's the only visual you will receive. And then we're going to skip the knee because we want it to bend forward. And the next joint we're going to click on is going to be here in this ankle-ish area. Okay? And so again, to test it out with the move tool, not the rotate tool, we're going to basically move this up and down. And as you see, his leg is going to start moving in a very walk cycle format. Okay? So I'm going to adjust or undo any kind of movements. The other visual you will see from this inverse schematic is that at the top of the hip area, we've got a brown ring around his hip, and then this white arrow pulling forward. This is referred to as a pull vector. Now a pull vector essentially limits the threshold in which one can kick. Okay, so right now, by default, the inverse schematic is set to a 90-degree angle. So if I were to kick this character's leg up, notice what happens right about when I crossed over what would have been this visual line right here. Okay, so if you can hypothetically see that there's white lines coming across right here, and as soon as my mouse crosses over that hypothetical line, my leg goes through a twisting process. And so this is very similar to what one would expect your body to do when you kick so high. And let's say in kickboxing and you want to kick a little higher, you ultimately twist your hips and your body into the side directions. That way you can get your leg just a little higher by doing a back kick. And so that's exactly what's happening when we move this leg. It's twisting so that way we can do a back kick. Or in this case, we would twist it this way. Okay? So that's called inverse kinematics with a rotation plane. The other benefit of using the rotation plane is that it allows us to control the knee swagger, so to speak. So if you wanted to create a bow-legged movement, or if we wanted to control how much the knees twist in or twist out, or if your character was doing some dance moves, we could modify it based on the pole vector. Okay, so I want to do the same thing to the other leg, and unfortunately with inverse kinematics, you cannot duplicate them. You actually have to recreate them, because in the process of creating the inverse schematic, you are assigning it to a particular joint. So we'll just click once on his right hip, click a second time on his right ankle, and once again to test it out, move up and down, and you can see moving up and down. Okay. Now I didn't modify the paint weights on this side, as you just saw part of his foot moved, but we did modify it on this side in our last video. Okay. So when you're moving around your character, you can see at the very bottom here, these little brown bars are sticking out, and that is how you are going to access the inverse kinematics. Never, ever, 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 ever attempt to select the joint to move these characters now. You basically have given your control over to the inverse kinematics to make these animations move. Okay? The next thing we're going to do is we actually need to create a few more inverse kinetic controllers throughout the foot area here, so that way we can have control over the way his foot's going to bend. Okay? That's facing on the joint, silly you. Alright, so let's click on this handler. So what I want to do, and you can see how as I pull it up, his foot's kind of pointing down, which is not normal for your toes to point down as you drag up your ankle. So we're going to create a few more inverse kinematics handlers. So again, I'm going to activate the inverse kinetic controller and make sure we set it to rotation plane. We're going to click on the ankle. So yes, this is right where we left off our last IK handler. We're going to drop a new one starting here. We're going to skip a joint, and then we're going to go to this joint right here, which is like his ball area. Okay, and so you'll see the little brown nubbies are sticking out. That's how you would access it. And then we're going to do one more, just because this toe end will get lost. So we're just going to attach it here. We're not skipping a joint in this last scenario, but we want it to be there so that way we can have full control over the foot when we want to bend it, point it, flex it when we get the character to walk. Okay? Alright, so I'm going to rename this handle here. This one's going to, this is the ankle one, the first one we created. This is going to be called IK leg. Okay, this one we're going to bend this brown handle and call it IK. Oh, actually, this should be left ball. Let me rename this one to IK left foot. Come on. IK left leg. Okay? And then this one we're going to do IK left toe. Alright. So now they've all been renamed. Okay? So likewise, I want to essentially do the same thing on the other side. So I'll repeat the process. There we go. Come on, video card. Keep up with us. Alright, so we're on his right side, so I'll rename this handler that we already created. We'll call this one IK right leg. We're going to activate our IK handler tool, set it for rotation plane. We're going to go from the ankle. We're going to skip this joint and then release it on top of the ball area. This IK, right? We call it ball. And then we'll activate the IK handle tool one more time. Go from the ball and go into the toe ends, just so we don't lose those toesies. Again, we're going to rename this one to IK right toe. Okay, and let's go back up to his other arm where we create the IK up here, and we're going to call this one IK left arm. Really quick, we'll create one more inverse kinetic handler for his right arm, and again we were going to modify this from a rotation plane to a single chain. Go from his shoulder, skip the elbow, go to the wrist, and rename this one to IK right, because it's his right, and then arm. Okay, so the next step of this rigging process is to create manipulators. Okay, so this is rather easy to do. We're first going to create a manipulator so that way we don't have to click on these actual little handles sticking out here for the pull vector. So let's create ourselves a locator. So we're going to go to Create, menu at the top, go down to Locator. Okay, now this locator gets put into the 0, 0, 0 quadrant. So I'm going to pull it forward. I'm going to hop into four-way view really quick here. It's just the easiest way of doing so. I'm going to move this locator up in front of his knee according to the side view. Okay, and move it forward a little bit, about 5, 6 units. This is so that way I can see it. It's not too far forward, not too far out of view. And then you can see in the front view, I've also adjusted its placement and put it basically right in front of his left knee. So we're going to call this one PV for pull vector, and then left leg. Okay, and because this isn't attached to anything at this point, I can just duplicate it. So my move tool is still turned on. Control D will Control D will duplicate it for me. Excuse me, and then I'm going to move it in front of his other leg. I don't know if I duplicated it. Let me undo that. Control D, and then move it over here. So you can see in the top view, if I were to click off, I have 2 plus signs. Those are my locators. So I'm going to rename this pull vector left leg, and then I'm going to rename this one to pull vector right leg. So PV right leg. So now my 2 pull vectors are renamed, and now I have to constrain them to my actual legs. That way they function. Let's pop back into our perspective view. Okay, so here's those 2 green plus signs that we saw there, and you can see with the translate tool, they're not attached to anything quite yet. Okay, so I'm going to undo that movement. So what I need to do to attach these to the actual leg, I have the locator selected, one at a time, and then shift click the IK handle that's at the ankle. Okay, that's the first IK that we created. Then go up to the constraint menu and click on pull vector. Okay, you'll see a slight adjustment, and I'm going to click off to make sure nothing is selected, and then I'm going to click on just the locator. I don't want to accidentally have the IK handler selected as well. Okay, so now you can see as I make a slight adjustment to this, this leg will go left and right. Okay, that's part of the swagger. So let's repeat the same process for the other one. However, hindsight says, you know what, I probably should have zeroed out the location of that new locator. So with it selected, I'm going to go to Modify, Freeze Transformations. Okay, and then you can see it zeroed it out. Oops, let's see, I must have undone that. PV right leg. That's a pull vector. Alright, so with it selected, I'm going to shift click on the IK handle that we created on the right foot ankle. So in that order, locator first, IK handle second, constrain, and then go down to pull vector. Click off, test it out, click on, and make a slight adjustment. So that's how you are able to then manipulate and move the knees of your character.